Starting with the treatment of nephrotic syndrome, I'm going to read from edition 22 of Nelson's, page number 3228. Let's start. Children with their first episode of nephrotic syndrome and mild to moderate edema may be managed as outpatients. We don't need to admit those patients. Right. First episode and very mild to moderate edema. Such outpatient management is not practiced in all the major centers because time required for successful education of the family regarding all the aspects of the conditions that require a short period of hospitalization. The child's parents must be able to recognize the signs and symptoms of the complication of the disease and may be taught about how to use a dipstick and interpret the results to monitor for the degree of proteinuria. Tuberculosis may be ruled out before starting the immunosuppressive therapy with the corticosteroids by placing purified protein derivative skin test or obtaining an interferon gamma release assay and confirming the negative result. Children with the onset of uncomplicated nephrotic syndrome between 1 and 12 years of age are likely to have steroid responsive MCNS, and steroid therapy may be initiated without a diagnostic renal biopsy. This MCNS is minimal change nephrotic syndrome. Okay, children with the features that make minimal change nephrotic syndrome are less likely to have this gross hematuria and sustained hypertension and acute kidney injury and low C3 levels and arthritis or rash to suggest glomerulonephritis or age less than 1 year or more than 12 years should be considered for the renal biopsy before treatment. So this all written in this bracket. These kind of children with hypertension, with hematuria, hypertension, AKI, and low C3 levels, arthritis, rash, suggest glomerulonephritis, or age less than 1 year or more than 12 years should be considered for renal biopsy. Okay, moving ahead. Use of corticosteroid to treat the minimal change nephrotic syndrome. Corticosteroids are the mainstay of therapy for the MCNS. The treatment guidelines for the corticosteroid use are prescribed in the following sections are adopted based on the 2021 kidney disease improving global outcome clinical practice guidelines on the glomerulonephritis. Now, the treatment for the initial episode of the nephrotic syndrome, the children with the presumed MCNS, prednisone should be administered as a single day dose of 60 mg per meter square per day or 2 mg per kg per day to a maximum of 60 mg daily for 4 to 6 weeks, followed by an alternate day prednisolone, starting at 40 mg per meter square every other day or 1.5 mg per kg every other day for a period ranging from 4 to 6 weeks again. The issue of uh, duration of the steroid treatment has been controversial, but the current evidence suggests that prolonged more than 12 weeks glucocorticoid treatment increases the risk of adverse effect without further improving the clinical outcome. Approximately 80-90% of the children respond to the steroid therapy. Response is defined as an attainment of remission within an initial 4 weeks of the corticosteroid therapy. So there is remission within 4 weeks of this therapy, and remission consists of urine protein creatinine ratio of less than zero point 0.2 or less than 1 plus protein on the dipstick test for the 3 consecutive days. This is remission. Protein creatinine ratio of less than zero point 0.2 or less than plus 1. Fine. And dipstick nil for or less than 1 protein for 3 consecutive days. Most children who respond to prednisolone therapy do so within the first 5 weeks of treatment. Managing the clinical sequelae of the nephrotic syndrome. Edema. If child has edema, children with a severe symptomatic edema, including the large pleural effusion, ascites, or severe genital edema, should be hospitalized in addition to sodium restriction to less than 1500 milligram daily. Water fluid restriction may be necessary if the child is hyponatremic. A swollen scrotum may be elevated, but this water or fluid restriction need to be done if the child is hyponatremic. Okay, a swollen scrotum may be elevated with the pillows to enhance the fluid removal by the gravity, and diuresis may be augmented by the administration of diuretics. So if there is less urine output, then we can no. If there is more edema, then we can start diuretics like furosemide orally or IV. Although extreme caution should be exercised. Aggressive diuresis can lead to intravascular volume depletion and increase risk factor of acute renal failure and intravascular thrombosis. So we don't have to do this aggressive diuresis as it can increase the risk of acute renal failure and intravascular thrombosis. When a patient has severe generalized edema with the evidence of intravascular volume depletion, when the patient has what severe generalized edema with evident intravascular volume depletion, that is hemoconcentration is occurring, there is hypotension and there is tachycardia, IV administration of 25% albumin as a slow infusion followed by furosemide is sometimes necessary. What we are to supposed to give? IV. One second. Fine. So if there is intravascular volume depletion and severe generalized edema, we have to give 25% albumin IV as a slow infusion followed by furosemide. And 25% albumin, there is zero point 0.5 to 1 gram albumin per kg and 1 to 2 mg per kg dose IV of furosemide. Such therapy should be used only in collaboration with the pediatric nephrologist and mandates close monitoring of the volume status, blood pressure, serum electrolyte, and the renal function. Symptomatic overload with hypertension and heart failure and pulmonary edema is potential complication of the parenteral albumin therapy. What can occur if we give parenteral albumin therapy? There can be volume overload, there can be hypertension, there can be heart failure, pulmonary edema. These are all the potential complications when it is administered as a rapid infusion. Okay, so this is how we manage what hypoalbuminemia, like edema, right? What did we do? We did water and fluid restriction. If hyponatremia was present, we can give diuretics for diuresis with extreme caution, but aggressive diuresis is not to be done because it increases the risk of acute renal failure and intravascular thrombosis. If there is severe generalized edema and intravascular volume depletion, we can give IV administration of albumin followed by furosemide. Now, for dyslipidemia, what we are supposed to do? Dyslipidemia should be managed with a low fat diet. Dietary fat intake should be limited to less than 30% of the calories. Dietary fat intake, okay. This we have to maintain a low fat diet with a saturated fat intake of less than 10%. Dietary cholesterol intake should be less than 300 milligram per day. There are sufficient data to recommend the use of the 3-hydroxy 3-methyl butyryl coenzyme HMG CoA reductase inhibitors routinely in children with dyslipidemia. So we can use this. But no, there is insufficient data. So wait for enough data to be there to use it. Right, this was all about dyslipidemia. Now, for infections, families with the children with the nephrotic syndrome should be counseled regarding the signs and symptoms of the infection, such as cellulitis, peritonitis, and bacteremia. If there is a suspicion of infection, a blood culture should be drawn before starting the empirical antibiotics. In case of spontaneous bacterial peritonitis, peritoneal fluid should be collected if there is sufficient fluid to perform a paracentesis and send for the cell count, gram stain, and culture. The antibiotic provided must be of broad spectrum coverage to include the pneumococcus and gram negative bacteria. A third generation cephalosporin is common choice of the IV antibiotic like ceftriaxone and cefotaxime. Fine. So what we did was we have to counsel the families about the signs and symptoms of the infections, and these were the possible infections that can be present. That's it, and we have to start empirical antibiotic, probably a third generation cephalosporin. Now for thromboembolism. Children who present with the clinical signs of thromboembolism should be evaluated with appropriate imaging studies to confirm the presence of a clot. We have to confirm the presence of clot if it is present or not. Studies to decline delineate a specific underlying hypercoagulable state are recommended. In children with the thrombotic events, anticoagulation therapy, including the heparin, low molecular weight heparin, and the warfarin, are therapeutic options that appear to be effective. What we can do is the children who had any thrombotic events, we can give anticoagulation therapy including heparin and low molecular weight heparin or warfarin. Fine. Moving ahead, for obesity and growth, glucocorticoids may increase the body mass index in children who are overweight. When the steroid therapy is initiated, and these children are more likely to remain overweight. Anticipatory diet counseling is recommended. Growth may be affected in children who require long term corticosteroid therapy. Steroid sparing strategies may improve the linear growth in children who require prolonged course of steroids. So this glucocorticoids will increase the weight and will growth may be affected in children who require long-term corticosteroid therapy, right? So what can be done who require long-term steroid therapy? We can give steroid sparing agents or strategies can be followed. Now, in case of any relapse in the nephrotic syndrome, relapse of the nephrotic syndrome is defined as urine protein or creatinine ratio of. Okay, so what should be the urine protein and creatinine ratio of more than two? Sorry, of more than two or more than three. Protein on the oh 1 second, I did something wrong. Urine protein creatinine ratio of more than two. This was 1 point. Urine protein and creatinine ratio of more than two, or why is it so dark? Why right? More than 3 protein on urine dipstick testing for 3 consecutive days. This is the definition of relapse, that there is more than 3 plus protein on the dipstick for 3 consecutive days. Relapse are common, especially in the younger children, and often triggered by the upper respiratory tract infections or the GI infections. Relapse are usually treated similar to the initial episode, except that the daily prednisolone course are shortened. Daily high-dose prednisolone is given until the child has achieved remission, and the regime is then switched to alternate day therapy. Fine. So, in case of any relapse, we have to treat till the patient has achieved remission and then switch to alternate day therapy. Fine. The duration of the alternate day therapy varies depending on the frequency of the relapse of the individual child. Children are classified as infrequent relapsers or frequent relapsers, and as being steroid dependent based on the number of the relapse in a 12-month period or their inability to remain in remission following discontinuation of the steroid therapy. Now, starting with the steroid resistance, the steroid resistance is defined as a failure to achieve remission after 4 weeks of corticosteroid therapy. Fine. So, how do we define steroid resistance? It is defined as if the child is not achieving remission even after 4 weeks of corticosteroid therapy, then it is called as the steroid resistance. Children with the steroid resistant nephrotic syndrome further require evaluation, including a diagnostic kidney biopsy and a genetic testing. Steroid resistant nephrotic syndrome is usually caused by FSGS in 80% of the cases, and MCNS, this minimal change nephrotic syndrome, or membranoproliferative glomerulonephritis, but mostly it is FSGS, right? This causes the steroid resistant nephrotic syndrome. Implications of the steroid resistant nephrotic syndrome is steroid resistant nephrotic syndrome, and specifically FSGS, is associated with 50% risk of end stage renal disease within 5 years of diagnosis if the patient do not achieve a partial or complete remission. Okay, so patient who are diagnosed with steroid resistant nephrotic syndrome and specifically FSGS, there is 50% risk of end stage kidney disease within 5 years of the diagnosis if patient do not achieve complete remission or partial remission. Persistent nephrotic syndrome is associated with a poor patient reported quality of life. Hypertension can be present, and there can be serious infection and thromboembolic events. Children reaching end stage kidney disease have a greatly reduced life expectancy compared with their peers. Right. So these are the complications associated with children having steroid resistant nephrotic syndrome. Now coming to the alternative therapies to corticosteroids in the treatment of the nephrotic syndrome. Steroid dependent patients require steroid dependent patients and the frequent relapsers and the steroid resistant patients are candidates for the alternative therapy. So in whom we have to start? Steroid dependent patients, frequent relapsers and steroid resistant patients. In those we have to give alternative therapy, particularly if they have severe corticosteroid toxicity like the Cushingoid appearance, hypertension, cataract, or growth failure. If these are present, no, then we have to start with the alternative therapy also. First one is the cyclophosphamide. It prolongs the duration of remission and reduces the number of relapses in children with frequently relapsing and steroid dependent nephrotic syndrome. Fine, it does what? First thing it is doing is prolongs the duration of remission. Right, and second thing it's doing is reduce the number of relapse in children with frequent relapsing and the steroid dependent nephrotic syndrome. The potential side effects of the drugs are cyclophosphamide has certain side effects like neutropenia, disseminated varicella, hemorrhagic cystitis, alopecia, sterility, increased risk of the future malignancy. These should be carefully reviewed with the family before initiating the treatment. So the family should be known about the risk factors of the cyclophosphamide. What are these? Neutropenia, disseminated varicella, hemorrhagic cystitis, alopecia, sterility, increased risk of the future malignancy. Fine, then cyclophosphamide, the dose given is 2 mg per kg, is given as a single oral dose for total duration of 8 to 12 weeks and fine, single oral dose for 8 to 12 weeks and alternate day prednisone therapy is often continued during the cyclophosphamide administration also. Along with cyclophosphamide we have to give alternate day prednisolone also. During cyclophosphamide therapy the white cell count must be monitored weekly. So WBC should be monitored weekly and the drug should be withheld if the count falls below 5,000. The cumulative threshold dose which oligospermia or azoospermia occurs in males is more than 250 mg per kg. If the dose is very high, then it can cause oligospermia and azoospermia also. Fine, this was all about cyclophosphamide. Now about the calcineurin inhibitors, cyclosporin or tacrolimus. These are the calcineurin inhibitors are recommended as the initial therapy. These are the initial therapy for children with the steroid resistant nephrotic syndrome. This cyclophosphamide we were preferring in frequent relapsing and steroid dependent. Okay, these are very different terms. We will discuss about these terms later on, but you guys have to remember that frequent relapsing and steroid dependent nephrotic syndrome, these are different, and steroid resistant nephrotic syndrome are different. Steroid dependent, we were starting cyclophosphamide. Steroid resistant, we are starting with the calcineurin inhibitors. Children must be monitored for the side effects, including what are the side effects? Hypertension, nephrotoxicity, hirsutism, and gingival hyperplasia in calcineurin inhibitors. Mycophenolate can maintain the remission in children with the steroid dependent or frequently relapsing nephrotic syndrome. Levamisole Levamisole, an antihelminthic agent with the immunomodulating effect, has been shown to reduce the risk of relapse when compared with the prednisolone. It is not available in the United States. Rituximab, the chimeric monoclonal antibody against the CD20 targeting the B cells, was found to be effective in children maintaining the remission. Which monoclonal antibody is useful is rituximab, maintaining the remission and decreasing the number of relapse in the steroid dependent. It was decreasing the number of relapse, fine, in the steroid dependent and the steroid resistant nephrotic syndrome. Randomized trials with the rituximab have shown promising results up to 80% drug free remission rate at 1 year in patients with the steroid dependent nephrotic syndrome. However, rituximab is less effective in patients treated with the calcineurin inhibitors and the steroid with the multi-drug resistant nephrotic syndrome. Most children who respond to the cyclosporin, tacrolimus, or mycophenolate mofetil tend to relapse when the medication is discontinued. Okay, so these patients know they relapse also when the medication is discontinued. Angiotensin converting enzyme inhibitors and the angiotensin 2 receptor blockers may be helpful as adjunct therapy to reduce the proteinuria in steroid resistant patients. What can be used is ACE inhibitors and ARBs may be useful as an adjunctive therapy to reduce proteinuria in steroid resistant patients. Moving ahead, immunization in the children with nephrotic syndrome. To reduce the risk of the serious infection in children with a nephrotic syndrome, give the full pneumococcal vaccination with the 13-valent conjugation vaccine and 23-valent polysaccharide vaccine, and influenza vaccination annually to the child and their household contacts. Defer vaccination with the live vaccines until the prednisolone dose is lowered to either 1 mg per kg or 2 mg per kg on alternate day. So we have to defer the live vaccines until we read the dose is this, and live virus vaccines are contraindicated in children receiving corticosteroid sparing agents such as cyclophosphamide or cyclosporin. Following the close contact with the varicella infection, give immunocompromised children taking immunosuppressive agents varicella zoster immunoglobulin if available. Fine. If the children who's taking prednisone or prednisolone has any contact with the varicella infection children or varicella infected person, then we have to give what immunosuppressive agent. No, sorry, taking immunosuppressive aid, we have to give varicella zoster immunoglobulin if available. Live vaccines to minimize the risk of transmission of the infection with the immunocompromised child, but avoid the direct exposure to the children to gastrointestinal or respiratory secretions of the vaccinated contacts for 3 to 6 weeks after vaccination. The above table provides monitoring recommendation for the children with nephrotic syndrome. Now, reading about the prognosis, most children with the steroid responsive nephrotic syndrome have repeated relapses, which generally decrease in frequency as the child grows older. Although there is no proven way to direct an individual child's course, children who respond rapidly to steroids and those who have no relapse during the first 6 months after diagnosis are likely to follow an infrequent relapsing course. It is important to indicate the family that the child with the responsive nephrotic syndrome is unlikely to develop chronic kidney disease, that the disease is rarely hereditary, and the child, in the absence of the prolonged cyclophosphamide therapy, will remain fertile. To minimize the psychological effect of the condition and its therapy, children with the idiopathic nephrotic syndrome should be considered chronically ill and should participate in the age appropriate childhood activities and maintain an unrestricted diet when in remission. Children with this steroid-resistant nephrotic syndrome, most often caused by FSGS, generally have a much poorer prognosis. These children have developed progressive renal insufficiency, ultimately leading to end-stage kidney disease requiring dialysis. This is important that children who has steroid resistant nephrotic syndrome caused by FSGS generally have much poorer prognosis. These children develop progressive renal insufficiency, ultimately leading to end stage kidney disease requiring dialysis or kidney transplantation. Recurrent nephrotic syndrome develops in 30 to 50% of the transplant recipients with the FSGS. Now, this will be dealt later. Secondary nephrotic syndrome. Now, let's read this table that we have left. Okay. Starting with the new onset nephrotic syndrome, less than 12 years of age and no syndromic features or family history, we can start with glucocorticoids. One thing can be that there is no response even after 4 to 6 weeks. Then we have to do genetic testing, kidney biopsy, calcineurin inhibitors, and renin-angiotensin aldosterone system blockade. If there is a complete responder after glucocorticoids need to be continued for 8 to 12 weeks. If the child is a Frequent relapser, no. Then we have to start with cyclophosphamide, levamisole, mycophenolate, mofetil, and rituximab, and calcineurin inhibitor. In case of any frequent relapser, if the child is infrequent relapser, then we can continue with the glucocorticoids only. And if the child is steroid dependent, then we have to switch to mycophenolate mofetil, rituximab, calcineurin inhibitors, and cyclophosphamide. Right, this was all about the nephrotic syndrome management. Thank you.